There are a lot of questions that retirees need to answer for themselves before making the jump into full retirement status. We've covered a few of those already on this channel, such as how much money you need in order to be able to retire, various types of retirement and ways to save throughout your working years to set up for those retirements. And today we're going to be tackling one more of those questions, namely what to consider when deciding how to actually withdraw your money in retirement. So, similar to my budgeting series, this question has a lot of different potential answers, and depending on what it is you value and what you're trying to accomplish, any one of them could be the right answer for you. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all correct answer, as nice as that would be. So in this mini-series, we're going to be examining a bunch of different retirement withdrawal strategies that people have used to effectively withdraw their money in retirement. And along the way, hopefully one of them will really speak to you and become your preferred method. But first, in order to understand which of these strategies we eventually will be going over will work best for you, it probably would help to first understand what we're grading these strategies on. What are the things that actually matter when it comes to choosing how to withdraw your money in retirement? And that's where we're going to start today, because in today's video we're going to be covering the 4 factors that you should be considering when choosing your retirement withdrawal strategy. Let's get started. Hey everyone, Daniel here, and welcome to Next Level Life, a channel where you can learn all about investing, debt, retirement, and many other financial topics besides, because let's face it, the schools aren't going to teach it for us. So if any of those topics sound interesting to you, or if you want to learn how to better handle your money and have more financial freedom, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell next to my name to be notified every time I upload a new video. And if you want to further support the growth of this channel, you can smash that like button if you haven't already, share this video with a friend, and leave a comment below letting me know what topics you'd like me to cover in future videos. So there are, in my opinion anyway, 4 major factors, at least financially speaking, that all successful retirement withdrawal strategies should be considering. And they are income, risk, predictability, and buying power. The importance of each of these factors is going to vary from person to person, because some people are going to value income a whole lot more than the risks associated with generating it, but others are going to really want stability and predictability in their finances, especially once they've retired and no longer have a job to pay the bills. It all depends on who you are, like I said, so none of these are inherently any more important than the others, it just all depends on what you want to accomplish. But they should all be taken into consideration. So without further ado, the first factor of a successful retirement withdrawal strategy is income. And in the context of retirement withdrawal strategies anyway, income is not merely how much money you have coming in. That is part of it, but the income factor also takes into account when that money is coming in. Some retirement withdrawal strategies, such as the 1/n method, are designed to last you a shorter amount of time than others, such as the 3 or 4% rules, because they focus on generating comparatively larger amounts of income for you in the early years of your retirement. And this can be extremely intriguing to those who are retiring a little bit older on in their lives and aren't likely to need their money to last them as long as someone following the financial independence retired early movement would. But to just quickly illustrate how big of a difference this can make, let's assume that John has retired at the age of 70 with a $1 million nest egg. Since, statistically speaking anyway, the average lifespan here in the States is roughly 80 years old, give or take a few years, he's not likely to need his money to last him much more than a decade. In this situation, John may very well decide that he doesn't want to spend the last 10 years or so of his life living extremely frugally. In other words, he's deciding that he values income over the other factors like risk, predictability, and, to a lesser extent, buying power when choosing his retirement withdrawal strategy, and as such, he decides not to use the 4% rule, which simply isn't known to be the best strategy in terms of relative income generation. Instead, he decides to use the 1/n method. In the 1/n method, n equals the number of years that John expects he needs his money to last, which he will update each year as he gets closer and closer to the end of his retirement. Since, in this hypothetical example, John is expecting to only need his money to last him, say, 10 years, n is going to equal 10 in John's case. The 1/n method simply tells you what fraction of your total nest egg you can withdraw each year. In John's case, this fraction is 1/10, or 10% of his total nest egg, which would be $100,000 in his particular case. Each year, John will adjust the n, as I said, in his equation to reflect the amount of years that John still expects to need his money. So assuming nothing changes, his n will be 9 in his second year of retirement, 8 in his third year, 7 in his fourth, and so on until he withdraws whatever remains of his nest egg in his final year of retirement. Let's quickly compare this to the 4% rule, which allows you to withdraw 4% of your total nest egg in the first year of retirement and adjust that withdrawal amount each year for inflation after that, thus conserving your buying power. In John's case, he had a $1 million nest egg when he retired and would therefore withdraw $40,000 in his first year of retirement, instead of the $100,000 that he withdrew using the 1/n method. John would then, of course, adjust his future withdrawals for inflation every year thereafter. But unless John experiences some very, very major inflation during his retirement, he's probably going to have to wait quite a while before he's withdrawing $100,000 a year. For the record, assuming a 3% average rate of inflation, he would withdraw about $53,750 in his 10th and, we assume, final year of his retirement, or barely more than half of what he started withdrawing using the 1/n method. And of course, using the 4% rule, he will never draw the equivalent of $100,000 in today's dollars using this method. So you can see the difference that choosing a different retirement withdrawal strategy can make on your income during retirement. It can be quite huge. So that's the first factor to keep in mind. The second factor of a successful retirement withdrawal strategy is risk. Risk encompasses a few things. It's not necessarily just about risk management when it comes to investing, such as moving more money from stocks to bonds as you get older in order to limit the volatility of your portfolio. Again, that is part of the equation, but risk encompasses a little bit more than that. It also takes into account anything that you can do to limit or entirely eliminate the possibility of you running out of money in retirement. Let's take a look back at our friend John. Given his situation, he took a more income-oriented approach to his retirement withdrawal strategy. However, a high-income strategy will oftentimes carry a bit more risk than a more conservative strategy. As we covered, the 1/n strategy is a withdrawal strategy that tries to maximize your income over a predefined length of time. In John's case, we assumed it was 10 years. However, what happens if John lived longer than 10 years? After all, there's no foolproof way to know how long your retirement is going to last right from the beginning. Let's assume that, just for the sake of easy illustration, that John's investments stayed entirely flat throughout his 10 years of retirement. In other words, they didn't go up, but they didn't go down either. Basically, they did just about as much for him in investment accounts as they would have done for him had he just stuck his money in his mattress. Highly unlikely, I know, but this is just to make the numbers easy. John would withdraw $100,000, or 1/10 of his nest egg in his first year of retirement using the 1/n method. This would bring the value of his nest egg down to $900,000 at the end of his first year. He'd then withdraw 1/9 of his nest egg, which again is $100,000 in his second year of retirement, assuming his investment stayed flat, and would continue withdrawing that $100,000 each year, since that's how the math would work out in this case with no returns, up to and including his 10th year of retirement when the value of his nest egg would be $100,000. So after that last withdrawal, John would have $0 left in his nest egg. But then what happens if he lives into his 11th year? Well, that's the trade-off of using this particular retirement withdrawal strategy. You do get a considerably higher level of income in comparison to more conservative and less risky strategies like the 4% rule, but you do have a higher risk of outliving your savings. Now, of course, that's not to say that there isn't anything you can do to mitigate this a bit. You can, at least to a certain extent, do a couple of things to combat this risk of running out of money using the 1/n method, and I'll cover those in an upcoming video when I go into greater detail on this strategy in particular, but no matter what you do, it's still not going to change the fact that this method is primarily focused on maximizing income over a predetermined time frame, which is going to make it a little more risky than other strategies that don't primarily focus on the income factor. Which again, for some people is perfectly fine, desirable even, but it is something to consider when choosing your own strategy. So that's the second factor to consider. The third factor of a successful retirement withdrawal strategy is predictability or stability. Now, this factor is not necessarily focused on maintaining a stable, or more accurately, static level of income from year to year, despite what the name might imply. That may happen with some of the strategies, such as the fixed dollar withdrawal strategy, but it isn't the primary concern that this factor looks at. The predictability or stability factor primarily concerns itself with finding strategies that, to the best of their ability, avoid undesired changes to your income stream. These changes could come in the form of freezes, because certain strategies force you to temporarily stop the upward adjustments to your income if certain things happen. Reductions, again, because depending on what happens in your retirement, certain strategies will force you to actively reduce your income for the year, or until certain conditions are met, or just major negative fluctuations, which admittedly is not always about the strategy you choose, but oftentimes also the performance of your investments. But one strategy that illustrates the importance of this factor pretty well is the Guyton-Klinger rule, which I will also be going in depth on in a future video, probably very soon. The rule itself can get pretty complicated, especially when compared to most other strategies, so I won't go into the whole rule here because it's long, but one part of the rule is the concept of financial guardrails. Basically, one part of the rule says that if at any point your withdrawal rates increase beyond 20% above whatever your initial target withdrawal rate was, then you will lower your current year's withdrawal by 10%. This is called the capital preservation rule, and it's there to help improve your chances of not running out of money in retirement because it stops your withdrawals from getting dangerously high. So it does have a purpose and does reduce risk, which for many people is good, but it would also be considered a reduction in income, which means it would lose some points on the predictability or stability factor. There's also another part of the Guyton-Klinger rule that stops you from adjusting your withdrawals for inflation in years where your investments had a negative return, and this would generally be considered a freeze on your income since it stops your income from changing. For most, this would also be considered an undesirable change, or lack of a change, I suppose, to your income. And it would also have an effect on our fourth and final factor of successful retirement withdrawal strategies. Because the fourth and final factor of a successful retirement withdrawal strategy is buying power. Buying power is important for one simple reason. $1 million a year in income is chump change when a Big Mac costs you $3 million. So maintaining your buying power can be incredibly important, especially if you're going to have a long retirement. This is one thing that the 4% rule does incredibly well, because your withdrawals, regardless of investment performance, are adjusted for inflation each and every year. There are no freezes, there are no reductions, there are no financial guardrails, which admittedly can have negative repercussions in some other factors over time depending on your investment performance and withdrawal rates, but theoretically, this approach keeps your effective buying power exactly the same, from your first year of retirement to your last year of retirement. For someone like John who's retired at 70 and likely won't need his money for more than 10 or 15 years or so, this may not be quite as big of a deal. But to someone retiring early, it may be an entirely different story. For example, let's say that Jane retires at 30 with that same $1 million just like John had in our previous example. If she followed the 4% rule, she'd withdraw $40,000 in her first year of retirement and would adjust her withdrawals every year for inflation after that, thus maintaining her effective buying power at $40,000 a year in today's dollars, no matter how long she's retired. However, what if Jane took a different approach to her retirement withdrawals? Just for the sake of illustration, let's say that Jane decided to use a fixed dollar withdrawal strategy. In other words, Jane decided to withdraw $40,000 a year, every year, for the rest of her retirement, regardless of investment performance or any other outside factor. In the beginning, it would look very, very similar to the 4% rule. After all, the initial withdrawals are exactly the same. However, over time, things become more expensive thanks to inflation. So Jane's $40,000 today isn't going to get her as much as $40,000 will 20, 30, 40, or even 50 years from now. If we assume a 3% annual rate of inflation, Jane's $40,000 would be worth approximately $29,750 in 10 years, $22,150 in 20 years, $16,480 in 30 years, $12,250 in 40 years, and just $9,125 in 50 years. That, in a nutshell, is why buying power is an important factor to take into consideration when choosing your retirement withdrawal strategy, especially if you're planning to retire early, or if you end up just being very long-lived in retirement. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.